right. So your background. Tell us how you first started getting into this whole immersive art thing. Or even further back if you want. So you come from Pakistan.
Yeah.
So what was that like growing up there in terms of like the digital art world? Like what was the scene like there, and how did you transition from working in Pakistan to working in, I guess, Europe first, right? Is that where you went to school first?
Yeah.
Give us the background.
Okay, well, so I was born in Pakistan and I lived there for the first 16 years of my life. And Pakistan doesn't quite have a digital art scene, or at least, well, me growing up at a relatively young age, there wasn't all that much to hold on to. The way I got into the internet or technology to begin with was basically my dad got an internet connection for our house when I was around 11.
So what year was this? This was like 12 years ago then?
Roughly, honestly. Yeah.
So it was like early aughts then, right?
So it was, we had internet before, but it was a dial-up connection, but you wouldn't really be able to do much with it. But this time we got like a proper DSL connection for the first time, and it kind of happened, and the whole town kind of happened at once. Suddenly, like everyone had this internet, and all my friends joined Facebook, and that was a thing. And there used to be Outlook or something. Do you remember that?
Outlook, sure. People still use Outlook.
People still use Outlook.
That's like a mail thing, right?
No, not Outlook. Wait.
Are we talking about a social network?
No, it was from Yahoo or something. Well, I'm not going to stress over it.
Yeah.
But my dad, he's a principal of a school, and he's like he told me that I can't be on Facebook till I'm 13 because that's their age limit. I'm a principal. So basically, I was just really curious, like, how do websites work to begin with? Like, with TV or radio, you can kind of see that there's some infrastructure, there's some satellites or something. Like, they feel a bit out of reach. But the internet seems so arbitrary. I was like, wait, there has to be a way to just make a website.
Sure.
So I started Googling, and I found a website that allowed you to make free websites, and I made a website called Kids Corner 1 because Kids Corner was taken.
What was Kids Corner?
And Kids Corner was just like this random website where I would like put like a movie review, a game review, and like put like 3 Flash games embedded in it, and like also have a social forum where people would like have their profiles and profile pictures and would just comment. It's like a small community. And to my surprise, first of all, a lot of my friends ended up joining Kids Corner instead of Facebook. And then to my even greater surprise, a lot of white people from other countries started joining Kids Corner and be like, so cool that you made this website. Like, how can we make our own?
Were they all kids in Kids Corner?
They're all kids. Yeah. They're all kids. Right. At least that's what I'd like to hope so.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just became this pretty huge like ego boost or confidence boost because, like growing up in Pakistan, there's certainly some level of like inferiority complex simply because you grew up watching Hollywood movies and everyone has their own Western lifestyles and whatnot, and it's just so removed from you that you kind of can't help but look up to them. So seeing people really like what I did, knowing that at this one thing maybe I'm better than them, really got me into it and really gave me a lot of confidence. And I mean, I kept working with it, and always like design was really interesting to me. When I went to high school, those kind of things were even more intriguing and polished. I had a roommate who I still work with, Lars Leiter, who was also on my current project. He was an academic advisor. He was an art student, and he was really into a lot of design.
Are we still in Pakistan?
No, this is when I went to the Netherlands for high school.
How'd you make that transition?
So my dad was the principal of my school throughout, which has its
that must have been super weird.
Yeah. So it gets a bit tricky at times. But he, he really believed in me, and he basically told me that about the school called UWC, the World Colleges. They have at that point they had 13 schools all around the world. Yeah. So in a lot of major countries, they have a school, and you apply to the movement. And if you get in, regardless of your financial background, they give you a full scholarship, but they tell you what school to go to.
Oh, interesting.
So I was selected that year. I was the only one selected from Pakistan that year after a long, rigid competition process and debates and essays and whatnot. And then I just got sent to the Netherlands without my family or anything. At 16, I just left my home. So
that must have been like exciting and scary.
It was so exciting. like the scary part is less important because it was so huge for me. Because
Sure.
I could never have imagined leaving my country for like at least another couple of decades. Honestly,
Yeah.
like that's just not a common trajectory for people to go to high school in the Netherlands, and it just happened, and I just felt like, you know, a whole new world had opened to me. It came with such an ego boost of being like, you're the best in your country for this.
I'm hearing like a theme here.
It totally,
are you
100%.
completely motivated by ego boost?
I mean,
You're just an ego maniacal
I think
man?
I think it really matters. Like, it really matters what one thinks of themselves, and
Sure,
especially growing up in your childhood, like how your family treats you, how your parents, like whether they trust you or not, whether your friends bully you or like follow you, like those kind of things are what end up making your personality, right? So when I look back at my childhood or my young adult or teenage years, like I try to establish those moments when I got something that was unique that then allowed me to think of myself as something
special,
unique or special. And
I feel like most people that are in the arts, or even like most people that are pretty like motivated, get in that weird loop that I have very mixed feelings about myself, where it's like you make something or you do something and you get like a pat on the head, and then you start to put your sense of self-worth into your work, and then because your self-worth is in your work, you're like, oh fuck, well I better work really hard then, so that people like me and love me.
I mean, it's like with this kind of work, like you need to believe in yourself. Like really pretty. I mean, with a new medium where there's no established path of what's going to happen, you kind of need to believe that you will be able to make things that people will care about. And,
move this closer, just so people can like get like a really good view on you. And I'll be off camera for most of it, and then I'll poke in like this. They probably hear you better too.
So yeah, that's kind of how it went. And after the Netherlands, I took a year off in which Lars and I were working on kind of our own startup, and like the tech world was my kind of first calling. I wanted to come to the US because of Silicon Valley. That was the dream.
Yeah.
And when I did end up coming here, it so happened that I came here for art school. I got a scholarship for Bennington College in Vermont. Just seemed like the right call. It's a very flexible, small school where you can kind of do what you want. It's really expensive, and if I'm getting a full scholarship, it's worth a lot of money.
Yeah.
So because of that, I moved here, and then I had a couple of trips to Silicon Valley, and like initially, you know, I was the design and tech guy in an art school. And I would hate all the art stuff. And when I was in Silicon Valley, I was somehow the art guy in the design and tech world. Yeah. And I would not get along with the whole tech side of things.
Oh, interesting.
So at some point I kind of tried a HoloLens, and I was like,
and that really was where like you first like hit a nerve. And so to talk about that project and the reception of that project and what happened after that.
So, I mean, with the HoloLens, initially it was like, okay, I tried it in an architecture company, and someone showed it to me at Gensler in LA, actually. And I was like, wow, this has a lot of potential, because it's just conceptually so rich in terms of how I could have combined my tech and art and design kind of interests. It just seemed like the right call. So I collected a bunch of money. I did like the small project that allowed me to get some money, and then bought a HoloLens. And when I got it, it was all about like testing the waters. The first thing I did with the HoloLens in the first week was I made this like Harry Potter and AR demo, and made a quick video of it that ended up getting like 2 million views in the first week, and was on the Telegraph and whatnot.
Oh wow! Like, so that I mean, talk about ego boost. That must have been huge.
Yeah, so I mean, it was more than an ego boost, honestly. Like I don't attribute that to myself so directly. It's more like, okay, well, this new medium or whatever is actually really interesting for people, and Harry Potter is really interesting for people. So I was like, okay, this is actually not a good ego boost, because I can't claim responsibility for any of this. So let me make things maybe I can. Because a lot of people do that still. Like you see like Mario and AR, like that kind of stuff. People just like go viral because of these pre-established IPs, and they don't really have any creative, agency with that. So after that, I got really into like, I was at school. I really wanted to dive into the medium academically as well. So I started reading a lot of critical theory and worked with some of my professors one-on-one, and looking into simulation and simulacra and these ideas of, around simulation that are not just, oh, this is a computer simulation, even looking at social structures as simulations. And that became really interesting because I started thinking a lot about war as a simulation. There are just so many elements of flying drones over places and how it's done remotely, and the stock market, how it functions based on a bomb attack, what values go up and down. It's just all this giant like system that is so arbitrary and so not really grounded in reality of any kind. So that kind of became the topic for this project called Holograms from Syria I did, and then Terminal 3, of course.
Well, describe holograms from Syria and the reception to that, and how that impacted your trajectory.
So Holograms from Syria was actually a very basic idea. In retrospect, I don't even know if I approve of the idea or not, but essentially the idea was inspired by this artist called Martha Rosler, who was active during the Vietnam War. And essentially what she was doing was she was making these collages of images from the Vietnam War and really beautiful interior design magazines.
Oh, interesting. So she was just juxtaposing those two things.
Gorgeous image of American, desirable home with a dead body line, that kind of stuff. So I basically did the same idea with AR because I thought that would be another level of another step forward of the same idea of juxtaposition, bringing images of people who are dying and suffering in the war in Syria and make them interact in a very basic, flat collage way with different spaces in the US. And the idea was that you kind of get to point out that no matter what you do, we live in a very interconnected economy and world, and literally the sofa in your living room is politically and economically connected to what's happening there. So that was kind of the idea, and I didn't really exhibit it as such. I showed it at my school to some people. I made a video of it and put it online because at that point I realized that the way to get people to get to know what AR is to just make a video that shows what's happening, and people would really follow along. So that project got a lot of press and got taken up by some more established political papers as well. So I mean, Quartz and Vice and publications like that, or Hypoallergic that have a lot more art.
It felt like that got huge exposure, right? It was millions of people saw that.
Yeah, no, that a lot of people saw that, and through that, actually, Hossein Karimboy from Sundance contacted me. Then he sent me an email and hey, I'm from Sundance, and I saw your work, and I think you should be in touch with us because this is the kind of work we want. That was just a whole new world. I was like, wait, what's happening? Sundance has AR or VR and what is Sundance? It's I in Pakistan, I would always hear on the TV, Sundance Film Festival is going on, and this is happening, and it was just kind of removed. So I became really interested. I'm okay, well, I'm going to make something for Sundance right now. I'm going to submit it. And I was living in Oakland at that point for the summer, and I just started sketching out some ideas and thinking about what were themes I could deal with. And recently I'd gone to Libya and I'd come back and I'd faced a lot of immigration-based problems, and I had been having a lot of really great conversations with one of my professors, Karthik Pandyan, who was really insisting that I should allow personal narratives and stories to come into my work if I want this kind of cold, immersive, new technology work to be any good.
Yeah.
And I could see what he meant, and I think so. In that moment, I really initially I called the project Asad and Asad. It was that day I think I was in Maui that summer earlier, and someone was like, "Hey, what's your name?" I'm like, Asad, and they're like, "Oh, Assad, the dictator?" I'm like, or the bad guy.
Yeah.
And
well, so your name has one less S than Assad,
it has one less S,
the dictator.
And honestly,
which is really the only thing separating you two is that one S.
Yeah, totally. I mean, maybe his name is actually pronounced Asad there as well. I don't know. I'm not actually sure.
So for those of you who can't tell on the line, there's a subtle, to my ear, pronunciation difference, but to your ear is
I mean, it's pretty obvious.
It's two separate different things. I've tried to get it. Do I say your name right now? So I'm always Asad.
That's perfect.
That's perfect.
Yes.
As opposed to Assad or Assad.
Yeah,
Assad. There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. So that project started, and then I was okay, either I can sit down right now in this room and just make this thing, or I could make this an excuse to get some money and make this thing. Like that was pretty
Yeah.
much it, right? So my initial idea was, okay, let me just do a Kickstarter. I'll make like 20,000 or something. I'll get a lot of these new support that I'm getting from press and whatnot to raise that money, and then I'll have that to pay me. Maybe I'll pay myself, and I'll make the project, and maybe I'll include some friends. Like that was kind of it. But then that's what I went to Hassan with. I'm like, Hassan, look, I'm going to make something, but like I don't really know how to raise funds. He's like, let me connect you to Renee, and that's how we met. And
thank you, Hussein.
Yeah, basically Hassan deserves all the credit. And you basically, I told you that I wanted to raise like 20. He's like, no man, like raise at least 50. Like no one does a whole project under 20. Like how are you going to like pay for everything? And, I was just a college student, so I was like, okay, sure, let's do 50. I mean, I'm not going to complain. And I was like, how do we do this? And you invited us to First Look. So literally that day I flew back to Vermont, went to Bennington. I emailed all my professors. School had not started yet, so they gave me like this tiny studio in the sculpture department to just like go and start working in. I got in touch with DepthKit at that time. They gave me like a free, they didn't charge me a fee because they wanted me to work, and like I could always be like, yeah, Sundance is interested in this, and that would kind of do the
DepthKit is super supportive.
And
DepthKit / Scatter. Love those guys.
Those guys are just, like that whole project.
Yasmin, Alexander,
James. Without that, like the terminal would not exist at all. So anyway, I got a DepthKit set up in that tiny like sculpture room, and just started like, first hologram I made was myself, and then I saw myself in the HoloLens, which is pretty bizarre on its own. And then I started assembling a small team, like a lot of people that were close to me or were in school at that time. I was like, hey, you come too, and you come too. And, over time things change, and some stay and some leave, and kind of shows you who is actually, good for this kind of role. But Jack Gerard, who's the sound designer right now on my work and also does a lot of Unity as well now. At that time, we started working together. I lived with him in Oakland for a while, so that became a thing. And like Viva was on the project with me, and
it's also your romantic partner.
Yeah, I've never said that on camera, but I suppose it's a niche enough people watching that it's funny. Pakistan can be a bit tricky with this kind of stuff.
Well, it's the sphere of privacy.
Sphere of privacy. Yeah. But yeah, so Viva was like came on board. A good friend, Philip, from high school, who was a writer and like documentary filmmaker at that point, he came on board, and yeah, we made, I think we did some really compelling interviews early on, and it felt like something special. It didn't quite have a form yet, and we took it to First Look, and that's when I started having a conversation with Shari and the Sundance people, and Shari just,
Shari's the main programmer at New Frontiers, for those of you on the call.
And I really look up to Shari. Like, Shari's like Jack. We were at a party recently, and we were talking to Shari and Jack and me and Lolly. And Jack joked, he was like, Shari, you're the only person Asad looks up to beside himself. Everyone had a great laugh on the cost of my ego. But so Shari, basically at that time, I was telling her like the project, and she was just really like straight faced, and usually people get pretty excited, like, oh cool, you're doing that, that's neat. She was like, listen to me, and she's like, okay, do you think you're ready? I'm like, I think I can be ready by then. And she's like, look, you're young, you have time, take your time. Like there's something really confident if you can say, I'm not going to submit it to Sundance right now because I'm going to spend more time on this and make it better. Yeah. And I really resonated with that, and I didn't submit it to Sundance, although they were very interested and they were constantly in conversation with me. And apparently they had like the project name written on the board somewhere, although I never submitted. And at that point, it started transitioning to Terminal 3, and we added all these extra elements. And
so that project became
Terminal 3, and we did new interviews. And Renee and I were here last year at Sundance, and that's when we met Lauren from Tribeca, and we were going to give him the final push to have the project and program with Tribeca. And that's when we came up with the idea of like voice-based interaction, interrogating the hologram, like asking questions, having a Bronson narrative. That was Anita's idea.
Anita Gu is one of the executive producers, really awesome producer. who comes from the film world, and we pulled her in. This was her
Yeah.
first immersive project.
Exactly. And so she had that idea, and Renee had the idea of having a one-way mirror and building this installation. And then I was like, guys, if we're going all this far, I've had this idea in mind, maybe we can just do it, which was having the real people in the second room. Like, you meet the hologram, then you meet the real person.
So just a quick description of what Terminal 3 is. You want to?
Yeah, so basically the idea is that you wear a HoloLens, you go into this interrogation room, and you get this hologram in front of you, which is a documentary piece. So all the holograms are actually real people who have interviewed and recorded, and you talk to them and you ask them questions. As you ask them more and more personal questions, they start appearing more and more realistic. And towards the end, you have to make a decision of whether or not you're going to let them into the country.
Yeah, so it's the setup is you're in this room that looks like an interrogation room that they have at airport security.
Yeah.
And you're playing the role of, what do you call that person? An interrogator?
Like a customs officer.
A customs officer. Basically the person who has to decide, do you let this person into the country or not?
Yeah. And so then when you go into the second room to let the person know, you're expecting to meet the hologram again, but the real person whose hologram we had made is kind of waiting there for you in the flesh. And that was like really sharp moment for a lot of people, would come crying out of it and whatnot.
Yeah, because you'd already gotten to know them as a person. So if if you weren't a dick and you let them into the country, then you got to have that nice warm feeling. But if you were like trying to push the system, or if you genuinely thought they shouldn't come in, then you were confronted with that actual person in the next room, which was super powerful for me. And I think, the response at Tribeca was pretty phenomenal.
Yeah. And that was kind of the final push. I remember meeting Lauren. He was going to share his concerns with us before we even shared this. We're like, let us tell you about some changes we've made, and then you can share it. We told him the changes, and he was just like, you're in.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even want to tell you anything.
That was a great meeting.
That was a great feeling. I remember that. And I called my team, like, guys, we're going to have a world premiere at the Tribeca Film Festival. And everyone's like, yes. And so then we went back, and it was just crunch time. We made we made a feature film worth of volumetric, interactive, like branching narrative content, because we had 6 different holograms that like, it was a lot of work for 2 months.
And you did it in 2
while
months?
Being in school. Yeah, that was
pretty much 2 months, I guess.
I mean, it was here.
So it was February, March, and then it was
pretty much
showtime.
Yeah. So it was a lot.
Yeah.
It was a lot. Like, we did not sleep, even at the festival. Like, every day felt like a premiere, because we were displaying a new hologram the next day.
Yeah.
The night before we'd just be getting that ready. It was a lot. But so Terminal 3 then was well received, and at this point I was just like really integrated into the community and knew everyone who was doing work, and they kind of knew where I was coming from, and it just really felt like one of the first AR narratives that was elaborate enough to call it a narrative. And since then I've we took it to the Barbican, we took it on a tour. People are writing about it still. Like, there's a book that came out which has a whole chapter on Terminal 3 now.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it's like becoming part of the academic world as well in that sense. When I go back to write my senior essay or something, I can probably quote myself.
Yeah, because he's still in college. He hasn't even graduated.
Yeah, 3 more months and I'm out.
So then over the summer you get the idea for the next project.
Yeah. So
how did you like push the Sundance thing? How'd you get in, and like then what was the mad dash to get it ready? Like, give me the rundown on all that.
So the next project basically started emerging because, first of all, the challenge for me was like, how can I make true AR? And there's something about that idea. I still thought Terminal 3 maybe wasn't true AR.
Yeah, what do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is basically, so I remember meeting Casper from IDFA here last year, and he was like, "I'm critical of AR, of like doing it right." And when I did Terminal 3, like, it showed that you could have a presence and context, and all those things matter, and it's like in practice you feel it.
Yeah,
it just happens. So I was feeling good about that, but the problem was the space was just like had to be built, and it was that particular space. So it almost felt like it would be in VR. It would be the same thing. You would build like a set, and or like an environment, and people would do the experience in it. Because it wasn't scalable and was so particular to a space that was also kind of fake, because we would build it every time. It wasn't an actual terminal. It didn't feel like true AR in that sense. So I wanted to challenge myself to like figure out how to make something that is specific to a context but still scalable.
Yeah.
And the bedroom is where that idea came in.
Almost everybody has a bedroom.
Almost everyone has a bedroom.
Almost everyone has a bed in a bedroom.
Exactly. So like it's personal, it's specific. Everyone has their own connotations and associations with their bedroom. But at the same time, the basic elements of a bedroom are scalable.
Yeah.
Bed has a flat surface, it's textured, it's pretty good for AR content to be displayed on top of. And it's a very intimate, rich space with all kinds of connotations to play with conceptually. So that's kind of where we were coming from. And so I decided that that's what we're going to push for. Philip wanted to collaborate on the writing, and he was also really interested in the bed element. So we dived in. And the other thing that we wanted to bring on the table with this, for me, was like, I was really getting fed up of all this AI stuff out there that is just really, really surface level and kind of annoying. Like, you're familiar with Sophia from Hanson Robotics, like that.
Yeah.
It's just that kind of stuff pisses me off. It's so gimmicky.
Yeah.
It's like basically all scripted with like very basic branching narratives and interactivity. The same way we make our stuff. You know, it's not anything more complex. It's just, since you associate a face and agency with it, like people just people then start associating agency with it, and I think that's terrible, because that's when big companies are able to give up their own responsibility of making these kind of things, when they can say, oh, it's an AI, it has agency of its own. Like, it's totally problematic. So I wanted to deal with that idea and like get a public conversation started about it, because I think all the fears around AI, which there are many and a lot of people talk about, this is a very timely topic, are just really not rooted in the right place or misunderstood. So that's that became the two things that are combining, and we were talking with our team and coming up with ideas like the whole day, and a conversation started, and some people like in a group conversation, I can't even associate who said what kind of thing at this point, but like the idea started emerging that what if, so Jack was like, what if we say it's like a bedtime story, but when you go in, it's something completely different. And like we can market it as this like nice bubbly thing, but then we just like totally play with your expectations. And I was like, yeah, that's fun. And then this idea of a reverse Turing test, I was talking to Lars, he had shared a paper about the reverse Turing test with me, and we were thinking about it. Like, what if the whole thing is kind of a Terminal 3-esque, like reverse Turing test? And, a Turing test, I'm sure people are familiar with, is when a human interrogates an AI, and if they're fooled to believing that the AI is actually human, the AI passes the test. And a reverse Turing test is essentially like an elaborate CAPTCHA test, where machines trying to test if you're human or not.
Yeah.
And I thought that's such an absurd idea. It's like, imagine a world in which there's like some arbitrary department of digital integrity that goes around testing people if they're human or not in order to let them into things. Because imagine a world where there are many virtual characters and avatars and whatnot. And the big thing was like, what is the power this agency has? Maybe the ultimate power would be when they can convince people who are human that they're not human.
Yeah.
Like that's like the ultimate manipulation. You are human, but something that's not human somehow convinces you that your humanity is absolutely like aimless. So that's kind of the goal we set out with. And we wanted to build this elaborate test where it ended on a paradox, and like you just had to go through the frustration of not being able to prove your humanity to this AI. So you realize how absurd the whole thing is. So that was kind of the conceptual framework that we started off with. And then, we started thinking, what are the elements that would manipulate someone? And we wanted some sort of absurdity in there. So the rat queen element kind of came about.
And are you at liberty to talk about the rat queen?
I think I can describe it a bit. I mean, this is like spoilers then, if you guys ever get to see this, a lot of this will
the 15 of you will have to, if anyone who doesn't want a spoiler, write in the chat log right now, or just like cover your ears. All right. You're going to get it then.
Yeah. So, I mean, the reason I'm fine with some spoilers is because it's a really metaphoric, like there's a lot of metaphors in the piece, and if you know them, like it's a rich experience, and if you don't, still, like it's on the surface level, it's also an interesting experience, and at least there's a visceral quality to it that I just can't describe in words, so you're going to have that for it anyway. But essentially the idea was that you go in for this bedtime story, and when you try to start it, it gives you like a CAPTCHA test, and it's like, hey, say out loud, you're not a robot, or show a thumbs up, you're not a robot. And when you do it, instead of starting, it kind of like the loading icon transitions to become this like particle cloud that starts then interrogating you, and it says, I'm from the Department of Digital Integrity, and I've been informed you're a non-human trespasser, and we're going to figure out if you're human or not. And it starts off pretty simple. It's like, how many colors do you see in me? And there are clearly 3 colors. You say 3, and then it's like 3 times 3 equals, you say 9. And it's like, you're 9 years old. It's 9 a.m. Or 9 p.m. Are you asleep or awake? Slowly it starts getting into your psyche, or starts to like establish relationships to your childhood and presents you with these scenarios. And somehow in that moment kind of like gets you to say key in the sequences of questions. And when you say key, it tells you to find this key in the drawer, and there's actually a physical key in the installation you find. And then there are all these scenes with a boy on the bed that interacts with you and asks you questions and kind of reminds you of your own childhood while doing his own thing. And his mother comes in, and she's, you know, working late, and he's not been getting much attention. And then she reads him a bedtime story. The bedtime story is kind of a metaphor for like this idea of projection and personifying things as well. And then things just start going really crazy. And suddenly there's this scene in which the boy takes out a cage of rats, and there are 3 rats inside the cage. There's 1 rat outside the cage, and he's like, these are my friends, and like the rat outside is always lonely, so we should reunite them. And he asks you to use your physical key to open this like holographic cage. And when you do it, you're kind of expecting for the rats to be reunited and just to get along. But when it happens, the rats actually come out, and they pounce on the rats that's outside and just shred it into little pieces. And it's like this bloody, brutal murder on your bed. And I mean, where that comes from is like...
The first time you told me the idea for this project, I totally thought you were fucking with me. And I love that you weren't, and that this is actually the project, and that it all happened.
It's at Sundance for some reason.
Yeah, no, it's keep going though.
I can't believe I raised money for this, honestly, but I like, that's an ego boost. Like when you can raise money for something like that, then you really know you can go out and just make weird things, which is nice. But I mean, that scene for me was inspired by this passage from from Nagel, which basically is it's called Spider in the Urinal. The idea is that he says he went to the urinal and there was a spider in it. He went to the urinal again later that day. There was still the spider was in there. He's like, man, what a miserable life the spider has. Just sits in the urinal all day, like being peed upon. I mean, so he decided to take the spider out and put it on the floor, and he just opened a whole new world to it.
Yeah.
And when he went back to the restroom, the spider was still on the floor, this time squished and dead.
Oh,
and he's like, wow, well, I was projecting what is good for the spider onto it from my understanding what's good for the spider.
Yeah.
And totally didn't work out. So I think like playing with expectations in that way, if the same thing happens with the rats, and you totally have agency, like you literally use your hand to turn the key.
Yeah.
So playing with that idea of projecting what is good for them while they're part of this AI system that's like trying to fuck with you, that was kind of the point of that scene.
Yeah.
And then it just gets really absurd because suddenly there's a rat queen who's human sized, and there are all these rats that are just
played by.
Yeah, so the rat queen's played by Poppy, who I don't know if you guys are familiar with, is like a YouTube persona, kind of Android-esque, like AI.
Keep talking. We've got to share a link for
Poppy video.
Yeah, because I didn't know who Poppy was
till last year when we met Poppy.
Year. Yeah, so we saw Poppy.
We discovered Poppy together. Oh, you should find that video of us at the Poppy.
How would I find that?
I think Poppy at Sundance, a YouTube party.
Sundance YouTube party. Let's see if that. Oh.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I'm pretty sure Aaron Bradbury. There you go.
Oh my God, that's so funny. Yeah, so this is quite I'm going to share this video with everybody because it's so funny. So this video was taken with Aaron Bradbury, me, and Asad when we were here at Sundance last year. And Aaron went on to make, what was it? Vestige. Anyways, this is where we were introduced to Poppy on that link.
Yeah, there's a good time code in there in which Renee says, Poppy is my savior.
Who's your savior? Because you were trying to find a famous person for this project.
Yeah, so
it's down to the 11th hour.
Totally. So for this project, like one of the things we wanted was this last moment to be super absurd, and we wanted to have something to do with like the perversion of celebrity, because if it's about AI or media culture manipulating you, this idea of a celebrity telling you what to do or like being against you is like kind of powerful, I think. So that was initially how we were starting off, and then that was supposed to be like part of the disappointment that it's marketed with a celebrity on the poster or something.
Yeah.
Eventually, like they never really show up till the end. And like now there's this, So that was how it started. It was like somewhat of a cameo. But then, and honestly, that whole role started as a joke. Like we were kind of frustrated with, we weren't making that much progress with the narrative at some point. We're like, what do we do then? We're like, man, if the rat's dying, let's just do a rat funeral and have Shia LaBeouf be the rat priest. Like it was a total joke. Then it's just started becoming more and more real. But like actually that absurdity at the end is actually great. Like suddenly out of nowhere, without any explanation, there's now a human-sized rat queen wearing a fur coat and black contacts giving a speech to these tiny rats that are just going crazy. And the speech was, when I started writing the speech, which was also very recently, because that's when we, were ready to cast and everything. It was like, okay, well, either this character can clearly be evil, so you just hate the Rat Queen because the Rat Queen is plotting your murder, or this character can actually be very convincing. That makes it even more confusing. So basically the Rat Queen gives a speech about how the rats have been played around for too long and the humans have kept them in cages of their own design, and the order of redemption has been reduced to.
And the rats are like a metaphor for like artificial intelligence, right?
Yeah, like the rats are. That's kind of the fun thing, that the rats are the AI, but the child and the mom are also the AI, and Poppy is also the AI. Every character is basically part of the system that you're only seeing these visuals to see your response, or to see like if you would pass or not. So the AI is putting itself against itself constantly. Like we wanted to create like a complex version of a shape-shifting AI. Like I think just making simple humanoid figures and calling them an AI is actually it's weird, because in a way it's giving too much agency to the AI, but in another way it's like reducing the AI from its capabilities as well. It's just a very different thing. So this shape-shifting manipulative kind of creature that we made, that was kind of the idea. And the reason Poppy's white and like wearing white clothes and all the characters wear white and the rats are also white was like this tie-in with the AI. Everything is kind of projected. It's almost clinical. And basically the Rat Queen is very convincing, and she convinces the rats that they have to take revenge, and either the child in the experience or you, the viewer, has to be terminated. Terminated is just a nice way of saying killed. And basically that becomes your last like paradoxical test, because Poppy was very convincing. You kind of see where she's coming from in a way. But now you have to decide between you or the kid being like killed. And at this point, and generally when we do experiences, the kid's hologram will come back and it will be like, the rats went bad, now you have to decide. But how we did it here was a bit different. We actually, in that moment when you say, when the question is posed to you, there's a sliding door in the wall that opens, and then there's a cage inside the wall.
So an actual child
sits, the actual kid, essentially.
Which is it's like what you did at Terminal 3. Like you're like mixing, like putting real people in that environment. It's a good trick.
I think it's a good trick. Yeah, and I thought I could copy it for myself. And I think the reason it was so effective here, there are different reasons why it works, and there are different reasons why it should or should not be used. So with Terminal 3, it was just like that idea of your response being flipped suddenly. You realize how important and crucial that response is. Versus over here, it was like, if you're being judged by a non-human entity for your own humanity alone in a room, you start to feel somewhat not human. Like it's like you're alone. And until you have an observer, it's hard to feel human. But in that moment, the same child that you've been talking to suddenly becomes an observer. You know this is an actual person looking at me, and you know how their brain works. It's similar to how yours works. Because of that, your own humanity is like certified, and so in that moment you kind of suddenly feel very different than how you felt a few seconds ago, and like that's really powerful. So
that's your crazy now everyone has like a pretty good image of what that what that experience is all about. So let's see where we're at with time. Let's just wrap up in terms of like focusing on you, and then we can open it up to the people on the line. What's coming next? What are you working on next?
So I'm really interested in characters right now. Let's see if like how that unfolds, and a bunch of experiences in my mind that I would love to, work on. And
will it still be AR stuff or VR or other stuff?
Definitely. I'm not touching VR. I'm not touching that stuff. I mean AR, but like AR in a broader sense, like doesn't have to be headset based. It can be
mobile based.
I think even like something like Lil Michaela, for example, is like a good example of somewhat AR.
What's Lil Michaela?
Lil Michaela is this like virtual influencer. She's essentially like a CG asset that has an Instagram account with 1.5 million followers.
Wow.
Like it's a whole story around her. She's like a public figure without existing.
Wow.
And I think that's like prime for AR.
Yeah.
Those guys know it. Like I talk to them, and like so basically, like I think what's happening right now, the dichotomy between Lil Michaela and Poppy and like Micah now from Magic Leap, and like those kind of elements and those kind of characters, like having a public persona in a way, I think is very intriguing. I think Edward Saatchi and their whole virtual beings thing that I'm sure has kind of been dominating the news the last few days. I think that's all also very interesting. It's just, I think all this stuff needs to be very carefully done, because you can easily cross that line of something being a character and like, a character the same way Mickey Mouse is a character, or misused and like presented as some actually intelligent AI that has its own agency. And like, it's a clear line. And I think what I want to make is the really, really weird, radical character that really challenges that idea of agency while it's still being like super entertaining. And
cool.
Yeah, that's next.
I like it. Well, I've got some questions, but I want to open it up. Does anyone have questions for Asad or things they want to share themselves? Throw it in the chat log, or there we go. Something from Dennis. Is a hologram a real person scale in the Terminal 3? So participant,
So I think that's a great question, because obviously there are two things. First of all, I want, it's really important for holograms to be real person scale for me. That's what brings that presence into space. If they're tiny, if it's tabletop, I don't deal with it, honestly. It's just has to be at least somewhat present. Like that's really important. And of course, the challenge is that the field of view of the HoloLens is just so tiny. Like, what do you do with that? I think what we tried to do was we tried to incorporate that into the story. So the holograms you meet are quite abstracted. They're made up of lines. So them being cut off at some angle or somewhere doesn't actually feel too bad. It felt fine. And like this idea of being scanned and being made into a hologram just became part of the experience as well, because these Muslim characters are also scanned and targeted in airports, and that kind of the tool that was telling the story like became this meta commentary on its own. So I think one of the biggest turnoffs for me in AR is when you can scale characters, when you give viewers the power to scale characters. It destroys any agency or presence in the story the character may have had. It just like gives you full control. So I really don't like that. And for me, almost always the characters are completely human sized, and that's how they interact with space.
Any other questions? Good question, Dennis. Any other questions about Asad's work, or where he sees the industry headed? Feel free to raise a hand and join the call if you want to ask it verbally, or I could ask a few other questions. So one thing that I'm interested to know is what you thought of Sundance this year compared to last year. Like, how do you like? Where do you feel like, now that you've been in the industry for a while? Like, what do you feel like is read the tea leaves?
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting. We were talking about this like last year at the Ray. You had Valskar, Spheres, Chorus, Wolves on the Walls. All of them felt like really kind of like polished, complete VR pieces. They all had similar themes going through them, in the sense that they're all real-time animation, probably all Unity, roughly 10 minutes. Like the installation structure is a title sequence at the start with the logos, a credit sequence at the end. Like there was a format to all of them, and I really started thinking that, well, here we are. Finally, there's some standardization, and this is going to be like a type of content that goes out into the world now. But that just is completely reversed again. Like I think the only two pieces you could say follow that pattern are gloomy eyes and, from what I've heard, running, although I've not seen running. And everything else is weird and experimental again. And some of it is weird and experimental in a good way, like I think our project or the Marshmallow Laserfeast project that is trying to like deal with new technology, seeing like what the limits are, what else we can do. Like it's not necessarily the most like productizable content, but it's like pushing something. And then you have a lot of stuff that's not. You have a lot of stuff that could have been here 5 years ago as a tech demo and would be the same thing. Like there's a lot of Connect based like stuff, and I just feel like the time for that is beyond, like, is behind us now. So that was just like not really that engaging. And once again, I've not seen all that many pieces yet, but I enjoyed that there was, I think like for Shari and for the Sundance curators, it's important to keep in mind the essence of New Frontiers still being like a media art kind of thing as well. It doesn't all have to be narrative pieces. So I think the dial, having all the projection mapping and that kind of stuff, the light performances have been really interesting. They all have something to offer. I think they deserve to be here. I think an interesting question really is like, if you're a content creator, what do you make now? Like, where do you go? Do you make either really polished content that can sit in an Oculus app store or something, or do you make like more experimental, like Magic Leap content, you know? So, I mean, because it's also interesting to see where the money's coming from right now. Right now, it seems like, you know, AT&T and Verizon, respectively, with Magic Leap and Riot, seem to be like some of the big money buckets in the industry right now. I have a good established relationship with Riot. I have one with Magic Leap as well now because I did a project on the Magic Leap. And like Riot was obviously, they were produced on Terminal 3 and now on this as well. And we're in conversation about what comes next. But like, you know, the funding that was coming from Oculus is not really the most important anymore, or the funding that was coming from Google is like going away. So it's interesting to see what kind of content will have space over the next few years. I'm personally really interested in the more, like, I wouldn't say experimental. I think the more like cutting edge, working with technology that's just coming out, trying to imbue like actually polished narratives into those technology pieces, although you know distribution is going to be a challenge. And just kind of like playing along with the investments with 5G and edge computing that will be coming into the industry, and see where this stuff lands in like 5 years. That's the more reasonable trajectory for me.
So stay experimental for the next 5 years, and then,
I mean, make work and try to, you know, have like some commercial outlook. Like I'm not saying that's not the right call, but like I'm saying don't work with, for me, I don't want to work with tech that's 5 years old. I don't want to make anything for the Oculus Rift. You know, it's literally like 5 years old at this point, I think. So if I'm going to Sundance, I'm not going with an Oculus Rift. I think that's kind of a big thing for me. So I want to stay at the cutting edge of whatever is coming out there, and still, like, of course, with the storytelling, it's not like, okay, now let's be experimental. It's like there's always purpose, there's always a political goal, there's always a message that I want to convey. And then we figure out the best way to do that with the medium. But it is, the first step is to find the medium as like the most compelling available right now.
Cool. I think we have another question from Dennis. Do you want to read it out loud and then answer it?
Yeah. So, so the question is that if we worked with light in the room when we presented Terminal 3, and holograms look better in dark places, or do they look better in dark places? I mean, like, it's tricky because you do need light to track the room. Otherwise it won't work. In fact, one of the big things was with the kid being in the cage. Initially, we didn't want a cage. We wanted the kid to come out and sit on the bed and for the room to be completely dark in that moment. The reason we couldn't do that was because the Magic Leap has a built-in error message if the room is too dark. And we worked with them, and we tried to figure out crazy ways of bypassing that error message, like adding infrared light into the room that would still allow the Magic Leap to scan it while...
Did that work?
No,
would it work?
No.
I
don't think it would work.
And no.
We were gonna attempt it. Someone went to buy infrared light, and then we were like, oh man, let's just build a cage in the wall.
I love that you have a little kid in a cage in your experience, like a real little kid.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, it's like I was on a panel yesterday, and I was like, that must be a logistical nightmare. I'm like, yeah, well, the producers are all over the place trying to figure out Utah child labor laws. And if you need any insights on this, I can tell you that you can only put a child in a wall in a cage for up to 4 hours at a time in Utah.
That's really, really useful. If you get nothing else from this Friday forum, it's that you're free to put a kid in a cage for 4 hours in a wall in Utah, but no more.
That's good. And yeah, so the light, there has to be enough light. With Terminal 3, the set was really pretty terrible for tracking like white tiles and reflective mirrors and things like that. But with our current project, A Jester's Tale, we spent a lot of time like talking to Magically, figuring out best practices. We built a set that actually is like pretty much optimum for tracking. Like we have the wallpaper has texture, the bed has texture, the kind of colors and the elements and things that we have in there are really, really good. Like it just tracks at once. It's very, very stable. You can't tell a lot of that time in the experience because the holographic assets are so heavy that there's frame rate drops over there that I think we can improve over time. But yeah, so like the lighting, we try to not have it too bright because you're right, the holograms do look nice when they have a subtle glow to them, and there's like the background is a bit dark. I think the background being darker is actually one of the bigger things. If you put a hologram next to a white background, you can see through it more. If it's a dark background, it feels really solid. So thinking of things like that was quite important. Cool.
Any other questions before we wrap up? Any other announcements? Any other things that people need help with? I've got nothing else. Anything else that you want to say, Asad, before we sign off?
Well, I mean, keep your eyes out for the project. I think that I really intend to do things with it, push it out into the world for this time. So we were hoping to put it out on iOS and Android and, see how far we can push it. And like, I think Poppy being involved and everything is going to help. And hopefully the conversation around the piece can start to become more about the AI and whatnot soon as well. So I'm excited to see where everything would go. Other than that, like if anyone needs anything from me, or I can be helpful anywhere. If you have any questions,
how can people
about
get in
this?
touch
If you
with
want to ask in private, I'm happy to share my email. I can just write it. In
you want to write it in the message thing?
So feel free to reach out, a@onerick.com, and my Instagram, which is where I'm more active, is Asad J Malik. That's also my Twitter, but I don't use that much.
All right, man. Well, here I'll get in the frame. Thank you for signing in, and we'll see you next Friday. Who do we have next Friday? I think we've got somebody way cooler. It would be Jake Sally from Riot.
Really? Well, Jake's the only person who's cooler than me.
The guy who's making all the content come to life. Jake Sally.
For sure, Jake's the man.
All right. Cheers, everybody. Bye.